Welcome to the Disney Therapist Podcast. I am Tyler, your host, here with
Alan.
Always one word. I always expect something more, but there's nothing that ever comes. I'm not
saved
surprised.
it for the episode.
Yeah, that's true. Welcome to episode 12. This is, I don't know, we didn't really label with the last. We're talking about Thor. Thor Part 2. We're doing a character deep dive into a character psyche and complexes and all this other stuff. And for the first time we're doing this, we're looking at Thor because he has a lot of movies he's been in.
Yep.
So if you're coming across this episode first, go on and hit pause. Make sure you go back to episode number 11, where we dissect kind of where Thor started in the first movie, the first two Avengers movies, and the Dark World second movie, because I think a lot of those things that we talk about influenced who he was for the last three movies. And really, he goes through a lot of changes. A lot of things happened to him in the last three movies. So we knew there was a lot of content there, which is one of the reasons we split this up. So make sure that you go and check that first one out if you haven't already heard it. Or if you want to listen to this one first, listen to this one, and then go back and listen to that one. So with that, why don't we just dive straight into Ragnarok?
And so it's interesting because where we left off on Ultron, I think picks up with Thor is kind of in that hero's journey again. He is being a hero. He's being heroic. And his favorite line comes out because that's what heroes do, right? You know, he is confronting, and I forget his name. I know that he is the guy who is going to be involved in Ragnarok. That's how I've always identified.
Vader.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I think that we catch a peek of his hero complex here, and it's kind of something that was important. It was like, for him, it's like the hero always beats the bad guy. The hero is always, heroic. The hero always engages with like conflict, right? He always has to hit it head on. And I think that's something that gets shown is he is very confident when he can engage in a fight. He's very confident when he can win a fight, right? Because he has witty banter. He's poking at the guy because he knows that he's about to go and unleash kind of all of his fury onto this guy. And I think that he's very, like we said, comfortable playing that role. But there's the hero complex, and then we get immediately into Loki, right? Because he shows back up. He can, Loki is kind of gallivanting on the throne here.
Yeah.
He challenges Loki. They get, if I remember correctly, because I watched it, they try to find Odin.
Yeah, they go to Earth, and
had a little interaction with Doctor Strange.
Yes.
Then they find Odin.
Yes.
And something that I think was interesting is that when he's interacting with Loki, he kind of knows Loki's tricks by this point. He's almost a little bit playful with him, and as much as he's mad at him because he banished Odin to Earth, they're still kind of friendly until Odin is sick. The first thing that Thor does is looks at Loki and starts projecting, blaming, and getting aggressive. And this is where my comment in the first part was, I think that every time we see Thor, he's showing inappropriate emotion. Because if my father was literally on his deathbed, I wouldn't be yelling at my brother, right? Thor cannot show vulnerability. Thor cannot show appropriate emotion. And he always masks, he always internalizes it and always comes out as anger. And I think that's where the hero complex, once again, right? We talk about how woven complexes are. His access to emotions all interwoven into this hero complex. This, I need to fight things. I need to be able to beat things. And so I think that if Hela did not intervene, I think we would have saw him lash out at Loki. And yet again, we would have the sibling complex.
And then they have the sibling complex with Hela, because sibling. But, so it just made me think that, like, sometimes when maybe we have inappropriate emotional responses, it's because we have some part of ourselves, some complex, that's not allowing it. And when my mom was sick and was being moved into hospice, swear to God, got into an argument with, I got it. And I'm fairly, like, it wasn't a complex on my part, but it was definitely a complex from my sister's part. Huge argument.
Okay.
As my mom was, like, moving into hospice.
Yeah.
And then after my mom passed, my two sisters got into it. Another complex, right? So, like, I actually do think that we don't know. You don't know if you would fight with him, but it would make sense that people can have inappropriate, and for me, inappropriate is not the right word. Maybe they're not honoring what emotionally is really going on. They're caught up in something else because that something else is easier to process, right? The complex in a way is like saying, no, don't go there. Mm-hmm. That's way too hard. That's not you. That's way out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. Be in this other space. And that's what we see with Thor at the beginning, right? Because now he's kind of found like, okay, I can be the hero. I can be a little bit of a jokester. Like, it's been serving you really well. Mm-hmm. And then Odin goes and he's just like ready to go off on Loki.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so side note.
Yeah.
I would totally be the vulnerable mess. And I would completely share exactly what I'm feeling. And then he would yell at me.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So just like, the therapist is the one who's like, oh, let's talk about our feelings. And other people are going to be in their complexes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think in the same way, because I don't know, being a therapist is comfortable for me. And oversharing and being that masochist who's like, oh, everything's out there. That would definitely be my comfort. And so kind of that aligns with what you're saying, which is when we enter really uncomfortable places, we try to default to...
We're comfortable.
Yeah. And so for Thor, it's always picking a fight, right? We see that now as we're in the...
Well, and I think that will come back up in Infinity War, right? Yes. Uncomfortable emotion, pick a fight. Yep. Comfortable emotion, pick a fight.
Yep. And we see it, it is in Infinity War when we see him go to create the hammer or the axe. But I think that if Hela didn't intervene, we would have saw yet again another conflict between Thor and Loki because of how different they see things and how different they live.
Well, and it fits the pattern that they had before in the first movies, right? Loki's the trickster, who's the villain, who's going to do something that makes Thor mad. Thor's going to come after him and take it out on him. Yep. Then Loki's going to die or disappear or do something.
Play possum.
Yeah. Go away, and then Thor's going to be okay again. And then the energy builds and Loki picks a fight, is a trickster again. Thor, right? That was their dance. That was their dynamic. But then as soon as Hela comes, the dynamic immediately shifts, which I think we could probably do an episode. I don't know that much about it, so I'd have to read up on it again. But like birth order, and how birth order can affect like so much of like people's personalities and how it influences like how you react and everything else. Mm-hmm. And with another sibling coming in, their dynamic changes dramatically. And I think that if we're looking just directly at the movies and the character, it would make sense why their relationship is totally different by the end of the movie than any other time before. And it is probably to do with their sibling relationship change because of they had a sister they didn't know about.
Mm-hmm. Definitely plays a big part into it because it does challenge them. And I think that in Ragnarok, we do see them come full circle because, right, that is the theme. Thor projects what he needs Loki to be. Loki can't be that person. So what does he do? He plays possum. He gets out of it, right? Mm-hmm. And then he lets Thor cool off and kind of forget that the expectation is not true. And then they go and they do it again and again and again and again, which is why it was so important that I think 3/4 of the way through the movie, or at least before the last conflict, where Thor goes, "You're always going to be the god of mischief." Mm-hmm. That's where he allows himself to break that cycle instead of projecting, his desire for the sibling relationship, understands how to break the complex, break the mold, and get out of the concretized, this is what Loki needs to be, and goes, this is who Loki is. And what that does is it allows him to actually change. He gets to be, he actually gets to use a different tool, right? Instead of being the heroic brother who leads, his other brother into battle, he gets to be the brother to Loki.
How do you think he got there?
Well, I think, and this is my perspective.
Yeah, because I have a thought too. So
it's because he allowed himself to share on that elevator. He was honest. So instead of holding it all in and keeping it inside of himself, he put it out there. And I think that...
What led to him being honest in the elevator? Because I think he was ready to do it on the elevator. Right? That's the action stage of this change had happened, and he embraced it. He went vulnerable. He did the thing that we're always encouraging, right? Like, be vulnerable, put yourself out there, like, hold space, right? All these things that we talk about that demonstrate like growth.
I think because he took accountability.
Okay.
That's how I would see it. When we've talked about Thor before, something I've said is that he's always struggled with accountability. He's always trying to run from the source of the problem, or he's always trying to give it to somebody else. And I think that what we see is that when he's talking with Hulk, when he's talking with Valkyrie, he talks about how he is going to handle this, that it's nobody else's. Right? Let's go full circle again. In the beginning, when he immediately shifts the blame of Odin's death onto Loki, he is unable to kind of look at his role in it, right? He's projecting outwardly, and I think this is a time where he's done projecting. He's going to step in. He's going to take care of this. And so whether Loki wants to be a part of it or not, it doesn't change what Thor can do.
I think he does all those things, right? Like, he's able to have that conversation, do all that, because he has already been on this shift. But as soon as Hela destroyed the hammer, he got cast out, right? So he didn't just lose his hammer, right? His father passed. He realized he was not the firstborn, so technically he's not the heir to the throne anymore, right? And then he gets cast out and is lost in the middle of nowhere, and he's not the strongest, and he's not the hero. Every aspect, every like part of his complex got shattered, right? So the struggle he has is finding like who he is, why he's trapped on the planet.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he's able to have those conversations, is because who he thought he was got crushed, and he had to discover, like, he had to find the balance. And somehow in crushing it, like, he immediately finds the balance. And I think that comes from when he fought Hulk, when he realized who Valkyrie was, when he realized, like, oh, Loki's in the box, like, he's this trickster again. That everybody else is kind of these places, and he needed to find out who he was. And I think that if we fast forward to even after the elevator scene, when he has that flashback from from Odin, who says, you're not the god of hammers, right? The god of thunder. That almost like that is, I think, the arc that he's on in that movie. But he lost his identity, but he found it. And he found that it didn't need to be this one thing. And I think that's the balance then leads to him being actually sitting on the throne, because it was the first time he had found balance.
Yes. It's interesting because, like, I'm trying to kind of find where both these exist, like both my perspective and yours. And I wonder if they're parallel.
I think so.
Because I think that what's happening, right, when we take accountability, when we start projecting it onto others, we start to allow them to be them, and we have to figure out, well, if they are they, then who am I?
Yeah.
And so I think that taking the accountability and, like, respecting kind of who other people are, and then kind of finding yourself in that, and then your comment is actually really good, because it brings up a moment in the movie that I think I actually had to rewind it to hear exactly what was said, because it was so important. God, I forget his name. The Rock.
Korg.
When Thor's sharing Mjolnir with him, right? And it's very fast. He basically says, it sounds like you had an intimate relationship with your hammer, and it sounds like that you didn't just lose a hammer, but someone important to you, right? And in my notes, because I think when we had talked about Thor before, I had said that how important Mjolnir was, because Mjolnir was how he found himself to be worthy, which is why kind of your comment about Captain America being able to slightly lift the hammer was so
challenging for him.
So I think that what you're talking about was something that we didn't get to see too well. Once again, inappropriate emotion. We didn't get to see him grieve the hammer. We didn't get to see him grieve Odin. We saw him get angry, very frustrated. And so I think that what you're sharing is that maybe there are some off-screen moments where he is really processing, and he has to lean into the grief and the loss, and how that changes his trajectory. That if he was to hang on to the hero complex, I don't think his ego could take those losses, because that would shatter it, right? That would be, how are you heroic? A hero does this, a hero does this. Clearly, you're not the hero complex that you thought you were, so maybe you have to become something else.
Yes, become the king.
And that's where, and this is a really big callback to, I think, episode 2 or 3, where ego death was so important. Because what we're talking about is that he has to let go of who he was in order to become something new.
I will link to that in the show notes,
Yeah.
so you can go watch that.
Yeah. And that's going to come up again.
Yeah.
You know, there's a big death that there's a death that he has to have that he actually holds on to, and we'll get to that at the beginning of Endgame. But as we kind of navigate through Ragnarok, I think that as we talk, right, he had to form a new identity, he had to form a new way of approaching the situation, and he has this confidence with what he's going to do and who he's going to try to be. But we don't. That's the journey's not complete, because we see him show up to the throne. We see him lean into it. He admits, right, our family sucks at this.
Yeah.
Right. He says that with Loki in the elevator, and the second Hela shows up, he goes, "Yeah, you know, Odin covered stuff up. Odin just casts you out. Odin decides if you are worthy." Right. He's leaning into how the hero complex and how the family complex, how those are so ingrained in kind of their trajectory. But I think go ahead.
He sees the reality
Yep.
of what it is, outside of judgment of saying like, I have to cover this up, this is bad. It's just, this is what it is. And in the sense, I think this is a great maybe like lesson for us. And again, this is just my belief, so take it or leave it for that. We have to look at this stuff out of a lens of judgment, but we can use it to influence and make decisions from it, right? So it's not to say like, oh, this is a thing that happened. Like, there's no judgment. Everything's okay, right? Because I think there's a difference between being so judgmental about this is bad, this is wrong.
Yeah.
No, it's what happened. What are we going to do about it now, right?
That it's important for us not to concretize something.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it can't only be this. And it can't be this, and this is how we deal with it. It has to be we have to allow ourselves to adjust to the reality of things. And so something that he does is he has to be able to say, yeah, this is who Odin was. And if I continually try to bash my head against it with this approach of I'm going to end up like you, right? This is one of those moments where, do you think that Hela is maybe Thor's shadow?
Yes, I haven't thought of it that way, but yeah,
Right.
absolutely could be.
And that just popped up for me because I think that's something that happens is Hela is what happens when we like only allow ourselves to be this, that we only find, we only validate ourselves in this one avenue. We see ourselves we see Thor be Hela. And the reason Thor can be Thor is because he has this journey that allows him to make shifts and adjust, and it's interesting because I think that our pride gets in the way a lot, right? I'm not sure about you, but when you have clients say, well, why should I have to give in? Why should I give up? Or why should I lose?
Yeah.
I always like to encourage clients, it's, well, you might lose here, but what do you gain? And I think that's what Thor did, is by being able to challenge, who Odin was, right? Because he used to see Odin as, God, dad. When he allows them to see him as valuable, now Thor can change. And Thor can handle this new information. He has this humility.
That what I would tell Thor, or I tell clients, is if you think you're losing, stop playing the game.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if it's a win-lose game, if everything's black or white, we're already stuck. And that's where Hela was, right? It's like the complex of this warrior was so ingrained in her that when Odin said, this isn't right, we're going to not do it, she couldn't adjust. She was so stuck in her complex, nothing is going to change that in her. And even when Thor's having this conversation about this honesty with like, this is who he was, and he covered stuff up and it's not okay, her complex was so in control of this warrior, nothing's going to change it. And even when the planet's being destroyed, she's fighting, right? She doesn't see like, okay, this isn't good, maybe I need to leave. Like, she'd rather embrace her death because her complex is so strong.
I think we see it for a second when the sword's coming down on her. Her eyes give this glint where it's kind of like, oh,
this might not have been a good decision.
Yeah. And I think that's where she finally sees it. And I think that's where shadow drives us. Shadow will drive us into solidifying our lives and really keeping us stagnant. And I think that's what we see Hela go through, because like you're saying, she's kind of in this obsessed kind of berserker warrior where she's just really hyper focused on the win.
That we see two different things going on in this movie. You see this opportunity where Thor loses his identity, has to like break the complex, the hero complex, and be maybe the king, like leave the hero behind and become the king. And Hela had the same exact thing happen to her. She was cast out. She could have had this moment to reflect with this traumatic thing that happened to her, but instead of reflecting, she dug in. And how often is that what we do in our life, right? Where we have a traumatic incident happen, we have a reflection, we have a moment where we can look within and be like, okay, how can this shift me? Or we can say, screw them, they're the bad person. I need to stay exactly the way I am.
So after we get back from the break, I would love to maybe begin with kind of injecting a bit of Viktor Frankl's ideology.
Okay.
And I know, big name drop to kind of get my mind in the right setting when we come back. Because something that he talks about is existentialism, and how we have to describe meaning to something. And I would love to talk about how important that is when we lose our identity.
Absolutely. We'll do that here in just a second. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe and follow and do all that stuff, because it really helps the podcast grow, and we really do appreciate it. And that's our little break that we do. Maybe one day I'll explain. I'll explain on our Patreon why we do a break. I'll do that. Okay, with that, we'll get back to the show.
Okay, so we had left
Viktor Frankl. Frankl is Frankl.
Right.
Okay, go for it.
We had left off talking about the loss of identity, and then I brought Viktor Frankl. Frankl was known for using existential thought in kind of a clinical setting, like philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And so the big thing that I connect when I think about him is, it's a short history lesson. He was alive during the Holocaust.
Okay.
He was in a camp, and he had talked about how even though they were there, that you could find fulfillment in that life. And then I think that he did a book, I think it was Man's Search for Meaning.
I think so, yeah.
And he talks about how when he came, I think he was in the States, he would see people with all these things and how they seemed to be more miserable than people who were in these concentration camps. And why I think that's important to bring up is when we go through ego death, when we go through loss of identity, we are given access to create a new one, right? And I think that's where we see Hela get stuck, right? She loses this, but instead of going, what can I be? How do I still live a good life knowing that my life has changed? She goes, no, I'm going to still be me. I'm going to reclaim all of those things. So her arc is completely stuck and frozen. She puts it in her mind that the only way to continue her life is to get back to where she was, right? We can never go back. It's impossible. And I think that's what Thor, when you ask about why did Thor grow, it's that he leaned into the loss. He realized that those are things that he could never be again, that they're gone. Mjolnir's gone, Odin's gone, his claim to the throne is gone. So he needs to become new Thor. And I think that when he shows up on that throne and he acknowledges those things, he's saying, those were there. They don't fit with who I was trying to be, so I have to become something new. I think that's what allows him to get back into kind of the humor of it, and he allows himself to confront Hela, and then we see him now dramatically have more power somehow, right? It's just the confidence to kind of combat her, and then he's met with, he kind of gets whooped, and that's when he has that kind of process where he envisions with Odin, and it's like the god of hammers, the god of thunder, and now he has access to a part of him. And I think it was really interesting because not just that, I think that Odin talks about how Mjolnir wasn't supposed to be a weapon forever. It was actually supposed to be his training wheels. It was supposed to teach him how to harness his inner power. And so I thought it was really interesting that now with the hammer gone and with the confidence and then the permission, now he has gained access to all this potential that he has.
It just made me think of a thought, but I'm going to wait till we talk about it when it comes up here in a second.
Okay.
Anything else with Ragnarok?
Yes.
Okay, go for it before we move into the next, because I think there's a lot in the next two, so I want to move on to that.
So I think the last thing to bring up is on the ship. I think that he is processing what just happened. He made the decision to destroy Asgard. He knows that it's important to do that, but he's immediately met with doubt. He basically says, he doubts himself, and I think is it Heimdall, right? Idris Elba. Love that he played that role, by the way. He says, he reminds him that Asgard's not a place but a people, and so that helps him navigate that doubt. But I think that what really helps is that he's having this interaction with Loki, and he assumes that yet again Loki is just projecting. You know, he's not there. He's, gotta use another word. He's not transparent.
Yeah.
And Loki's actually there, right? How beautiful is it that the words he uses, if you were actually here, I'd hug you, right? Because he's showing a whole new level of vulnerability with Loki and accepting who he is.
Yeah.
But Loki's shown up, and I think that that's what helped him really navigate that doubt, because not only has he saved his people, but Loki is staying.
Loki shifted too. That maybe one of the lessons we can learn from Thor is when we really start to change and challenge our complexes and we become more balanced, it will automatically influence everybody around you without actively doing anything. It just automatically starts to influence it.
When we stop projecting our needs and our expectations onto others, it allows other people to show up for us that we might not have found ourselves having. We remove barriers, so people can get close to us if they choose to.
Well, I think because he was more balanced, that's why he can make the decision to destroy the island, the planet, whatever, the floating place. Because otherwise, that was so much of his identity. Like, again, breaking more of these concretized like images of his identity, that he's still the king of these people, whether or not he has a land, like a planet or a home for them. It's still who he is.
Yeah, and there's one thing that I want to get to before we jump into the next one. It's just really quick. I want to make sure that the people listening, the people watching, it's not necessarily that he has lost the hero complex and has gained the king complex. It's that he has allowed the hero complex to not be concretized, and it flows into a new hero complex, which we can see him as the king. I want to make sure that we that people listening and watching know that we never get rid of complexes. A good way of understanding it is, in the beginning, when we are unaware of it, the complex controls us, and then when we allow ourselves to process it, we become in control of the complex.
So when we talked about in the beginning of the last episode, right, episode 11, the symbols I used to describe the complex, right, was like we gave it the keys to the car and it was driving. That it never gets out of the car, it just isn't driving anymore.
Yeah, we have more authority over that part of us. Instead of letting it compel us and get us obsessed, we take note of it. We know when it's coming up, so we know where to channel it. And so in his lost identity, he examines the hero complex. He allows himself to recognize why it compels him, and he's able to make peace with those things. So it turns into something different, but it's still there. And as we see in these next movies, he's always going to have it. It's his job to actively take care of it. That's like, I think you had made a comment before, like a runner. If a runner hurts themselves, they don't have to stop running, but they have to take care of it or they can't keep running.
Yeah, pay attention to it.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we move into, and I think it's almost hard to separate these movies because they literally all are back to back to back to back, right?
Yeah.
There's no time
break
from one to the other.
Yeah.
So the end scene, right, the end credit scene is Thanos shows up on this new ship after they just got away.
They just had this beautiful moment. They're connected. They're
happy. Everything's happy as happy can be. And then
a very critical moment. If Thor could have just synthesized this stuff, maybe he wouldn't have gone through what he goes through here. Freaking Thanos.
So in Infinity War, obviously it starts, like the big piece is it starts off at the beginning where Thanos kills Loki.
Yes.
And like legit like kills him. Like He's gone.
Kills him, kills Heimdall, kills half of Asgard, the Asgardians.
Gone.
Yeah, the first like 5 minutes.
Yeah. Were you shocked when the movie came out?
No. I think, luckily for me, right, there was a long time between seeing the two movies.
Okay,
so watching it back to back, it really hurt because it was like we left Thor on this really like happy
note, yeah.
Right, and then immediately starting up the next movie, it's there it all goes.
Yeah.
Right, and that's kind of like the when we talk about like we're always getting tested. Thor was starting to process and understand all these changes. And then this happens, and I think that it actually caused him to regress a lot. He's helpless. We had talked earlier about how Thanos talks about how it feels to be just and to have a just cause and still lose. We see Thor has to contend with the hero complex. He has to contend with his own shortcomings, and instead of the shortcomings leading to growth and victory, it has resulted in loss of everything. And again, I think this time we get to see him with sorrow, but that sorrow turns to rage very quickly. And I think to drive the nail in the coffin here, one line that I really picked up on that I want to make sure I bring up is Loki used the word "we have a Hulk," and I thought that was so big because this is Loki showing up and saying, "I'm here with you," right? And then immediately Loki dies.
Yep. That what I just realized was the hero complex returned because of the loss of everything. Because something was going on that was so overwhelming that I returned back to what I did, which is what we were saying earlier. We just actually see it happen.
Yeah.
Because as soon as the Guardians pick him up and explain what's going on, he immediately is like, I need to go get a weapon. I need to go track him down. I need to kill him. Right? Like that is his purpose. There's no in between. That's exactly what he's going to do no matter what happens.
And how poignant is it that he needs a new Mjolnir, right? He needs a new weapon to give him the authority to enact his vengeance. And then there's something that he says, and I want to actually kind of find I don't know if I put him in quotes or not, but he talks about, I think he's been alive for 1,500 years, he says, and then he has killed twice as many people. And he talks about that because he talks about how Thanos is just going to be another person who gets to feel his vengeance. And something that I thought was interesting was, instead of being able to talk about this grief, because what happens is Rocket comes up to him and starts to try to empathize and draw out the emotion. And he touches on grief, but then immediately goes to the anger and the vengeance. And I think this was when Rocket challenges him and says, well, what if you're wrong? Like, what if you can't beat Thanos? And Thor can't make space for that, because what has happened is, because he's defaulted back into the hero complex, his ego is now wrapped up in that has to be him, or it doesn't matter, right? Like he dies if that's not the case. And he says, well, if I'm wrong, what else do I have to lose? So what we see is that the life that he was planning or thinking about that gave him new identity control over the complex is gone. Now it's either I attend to this complex and I am Thor, or I am nothing.
Kind of like Hela at the end of the movie. Like, this is what it has to be, otherwise what? Because one, I think it also it just shows grief and loss causes us to be stuck.
It can.
Yeah. And that it too, I think it brings up, it's hard we talked about this in our grief episode a little bit, but sometimes we think we've processed grief and then something else happens and all that old grief, all that old loss comes right back up. And a lot of the times I think we get so confused because we're like, why is this coming up? I've already worked through this. This isn't a thing. Oh, it's always there. It's always with you, right? Yeah. The fact that like he then loses his, half the population again. He loses his brother. He loses all these people. He loses. And it's like really one of the things that I think keeps Thor stuck so much of the time is he's always losing people close to him.
Yeah. And how interesting is it that we just came off the conversation of complexes never go away, and how we had talked about that clinical work. It's trying to process as much as we can and leaving an imprint so that you know how to continue to process. Because what we're seeing, right, is how the wound reactivates the complex and how we get stuck in it. And then I think this pays respect to our conversation about how like addiction happens, right? We find something that soothes us and we get stuck on it. For 1,500 years, he has dealt with, negative emotions by being vengeful, being strong, and winning fights.
Almost speaks to here we go, the neuroplasticity of the brain, right? That he's spent so many years doing the same thing over and over and over. It's really, really difficult to rewire your brain, stick with a new behavior, stick with a new part of ourselves. Yeah. So this is why it's so easy to fall back into old complexes, because if we're changing, it's hard to rewire our brain that way.
Yeah, and right after all of this is happening, right? There's this moment where we see all this clicking in him. He shows up to he shows up at the dwarf forge, and the first thing he gets confronted with was, "You were supposed to protect us." He didn't even flinch at that. He didn't even talk about it. He goes straight into vengeance again. He goes straight into, we're going to fight. We're going to win this. And then what we see after that is how recklessly he's going to respond and act to make sure he gets the weapon that he can use to kill Thanos. And when we talked about self-destruction before, this is actually a little bit more active, more impulsive, and more conscious, because now he puts himself in the direct path of the sun in the forge, right?
Yeah.
He's literally dying. Because, like we were saying, he can't think of life outside of now being this ideal hero complex, or this ideal hero that responds to that complex.
And we've kind of fast forward, so he comes, he battles, he's destroying all these things in that battle, but then he doesn't go for the head, right? Because he's so caught up in this complex that he's not thinking or seeing clearly, right? He's not balanced anymore. Yeah. So he's just vengeful and raging and being this hero and having to win that he loses.
He's not precise. And the reason I gesture is I literally have that as kind of the last quote, that you should have gone for the head.
Yeah.
'Cause that became such a big meme.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something that festers inside of him, and we see that come up at the very beginning of Endgame. And I think that's something that's happened is yet again, he experiences another failure despite having the potential. He has failed again.
Because if I get the weapon, everything's going to be okay, right?
Yeah.
Which is how often do we trick ourselves into, when I get blank, I'll be happy, or I'll be successful, or I'll be good, or if we do this, it's good. Yeah. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, interesting, right? Because as we talk about therapy a lot,
yeah,
being a therapist and imposter syndrome, right? Well, once I get here, that's how I'll know I'll be okay. But in reality, it's the process of getting there that will really allow us to be okay. And he forgoes that.
Absolutely. As someone's walking around.
Was that what that was?
I was I don't know what's going on. Okay, so that's Infinity War. I guess we'll get ready to move into Endgame here when we come back from the break. So much for listening and watching the podcast. It's so weird to say watching the podcast because it's on YouTube. If you are enjoying this, make sure that you subscribe, do all that stuff. But also, you can be part of the deeper conversation on our Patreon. We post a lot of notes. We post bloopers from the episode where stuff that doesn't make it that gets put on there, along with other interactive things that we will continue to do as that continues to grow. So that is all. So we will get back to the show now. Okay, so we're moving into Endgame, and we started to talk about it already. Thor's a mess.
Yes.
To say the least.
Yeah. So when we start, we are right. There's no time. I think 2 days have passed is when Endgame starts.
Yeah, something like that. There's been a few days.
So the snap has happened, and then 2 days, and then the snap happens again. So that's how they find him.
Yeah.
They find him. The stones are gone. Thor is unconsolable.
He is pissed off.
Right. He's not vocal about it, but you can see he's seething from the beginning. Right. He's in grungy clothes. He's not speaking. He gets in Captain Marvel's face. He just needs to kill Thanos. Because in his mind, right, that's what restores the ego. That restores the identity. He gets there, the stones are gone. He can't contain himself. He goes for the head, right? And when he asks, "What the heck did you do?" I went for the head, right? He is trying to repair the loss in self-image, the loss of ego, but he goes for the head, and nothing's better, and you can see that in him.
Nothing's better for 5 years.
Yes. And then when we see him again, it's when they show up to New Asgard, and he is kind of what I think canon, like when people have called him depressed Thor.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that the important part here is we see him at kind of what we talked about earlier as rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And he has gone through a lot of wounding experiences up until this point, right? Just even in the movies, there's this whole history, but this is the first time where I would say that he is experiencing like a severe reaction to trauma, right? This is 5 years he's been sitting in this. And one of the first things that kind of puts me in that is he has an immediate visceral reaction to even the name Thanos. We see his whole demeanor shift, and we see him be he can't contain himself.
Mm-hmm.
He hears it, right? We don't say that person here. We don't talk about that here. And kind of what I've assumed is what's happening is that his ego has gone through such a severe loss because of Thanos that it can't be reminded of Thanos, because that's just reminding him of his loss, of how he lost his identity and he lost all of his worth. And cyclically, I think that that's why he is such a worthless character in New Asgard, because I think that that's the new identity, that he's just worthless, because that is the only way that I think that he can protect his psyche, because I think without that he breaks. This is his adaptation.
The only way for me to live is to realize I'm worthless because I couldn't be successful.
Yeah.
Well, and then he also has Korg and Meek around, which are enabling this behavior, right? Like, no, we don't talk about that here. We don't say that, right? Mm-hmm. That sometimes what we do is we'll just surround ourselves with people who aren't going to challenge us or move us forward, that are just going to keep us stuck.
I'm reminded of our podcast how you said not all good friendships are healthy friendships.
Yeah.
And here we have, two great friends, supportive friends, but not friends that are going to challenge you or help you grow.
Not the friends he needed in that moment.
Which is where I think, Professor Banner, Professor Hulk, was so interesting, because he steps in and he challenges Thor, and he shares with him how Thor was there for him, so he's going to be there for him, right? And I think this is kind of where his development falls a little flat, because you don't really see how he gets from there to getting up and going.
Well, they trick him, right? Well,
they're
like, oh, come, get beer. But I would venture to guess, right? This is where we're hypothesizing, we're kind of analyzing what's going on with him, is all the other work he had done up until this point is still there, right? That, I hate using more spiritual language, but this feels very spiritual-esque, right? Like his soul was longing for a shift, right? Which is why he went. This is why even when people are stuck, right? How many times do we have clients come in who just are stuck and don't want to do anything different, but they keep coming into therapy? Why are you coming? Your soul is longing for something, right? We're longing for a shift. We don't know how to shift. We don't know what to shift. We don't know how to work through it, but there's something deep down. And I think all the work that he had done and all the changes and all the balance he had found, that was still in the car, right? That's still parts of him. And if we ignore these parts for too long, they will start to come out. And I think that's why he went with them, right? That's why he was around in all the planning. He was doing everything. Yeah, he was doing it in this very apathetic, non-caring way.
Two things, right? Your conversation reminded me of our earlier conversation about how from Ultron on, he had started to build a family with them.
Yeah.
And so, on his own, maybe his ego wasn't able to process any of the Thanos stuff, but with, Professor Hulk, Bruce there. Yeah. This is someone that he had bonded with, I think, more than any other of the Avengers because of Ragnarok. That there was trust there, and so he was able to trust Bruce and to go with him. But I think that you hit an important part, which is with the apathy, because remember, he still needs to have access to the worthless Thor, just in case this doesn't work, right? And how often do we, when we're depressed or when we're navigating trauma, do we set ourselves up for failure? Or we set a goal that's outside of reach to make sure that we stay stuck.
That I'm longing for change, but I'm also going to do it in a way that keeps me stuck.
Just in case.
Yeah, because if this doesn't work, I can't handle it not working.
Yes, my ego can't handle another failure. And so he shows up, and then he's trying but not trying because he needs to have access to that part of him that allows him to live in this world with this new identity.
Well, and it's like flash forwarding. Like what just went through my head was the flash forward to like them processing Natasha's, like, Black Widow's death, right? And he's so stuck in like, no, we have to fix this, we have to fix this, we have to fix this. But it seems like it's the first time he's accepting something because he has his family surrounding him, right? Like he has all these people, like the Avengers are family, right? That are going to call him on his BS, but also hold space for him. Yeah. And that's what they do. Like Hawkeye, the non-super powered person there, totally just is like, go fix it, go do it then. Like he calls him on all of this stuff, and they just kind of sit in that space.
Yeah. I think the biggest moment that happens is I think it's a little bit before that.
Yeah.
And it's when he goes home.
Yeah, he goes back. He goes back to Thor: The Dark World.
Yes.
And has this conversation with Freya.
Literally, right? This is where we get to see her character finally enrich, and it pays respect to, I think, the mythos of her and how wise she is.
Yeah.
He shows up, and immediately she finds him. She just senses him, right? And I think that's immediately where all of the mending begins, because she sees him. She sees him. She recognizes him as not hers, still makes space for him and nurtures him. And she's able to sense his loss. She starts with, time has not been kind to you. They go straight into talking about his shortcomings, his failures, and she says, yeah, you have failed, right? She's not going to sugarcoat it. She really leans into it. But as she's doing it, there's just this tone and this warmth it's okay that you have.
Lovingly accepting the reality.
Yes. This was another moment where I had to rewatch it a couple times to hear every word because I found it really important. But as he's talking about his failures, so he admits his failures and that he was too late, he blames himself, he concretizes himself as an idiot, and we see that as, right, I'm a failure. And she talks about, you have, but you're seeking counsel, you're talking about it. And she kind of hints at how important it is to seek counsel and to talk when we find ourselves stuck. But she also acknowledges his failure and doesn't allow him to be rigid about it. And that's when he goes, well, he talks about how he's not supposed to fail, right? That he's not supposed to be like everybody else. He said, I think the line is, but I'm not supposed to be like everybody else, am I? And that's where she goes into that speech that I think I've said on this podcast 2 or 3 times now. And I'm going to say it again, right? Everyone fails at who they are supposed to be. The measure of a person, a hero, right, is how well they succeed at being who they are. And this is, I think, what happens is this breaks the mold, this breaks the pressure. This is what allows him to have access to this process, this journey he's been on the whole time, which is someone deliberately had said to him, why do you want to be this if it's causing so much friction? Why don't you just let yourself handle it?
Yeah.
And there's a big shift, right? We see him kind of like wake up and go, oh.
Which is how the movie ends, right? Like he gives up being king, he gives up being all these things he's supposed to be, and he's really on this whole new journey of who am I going to be?
Yes.
And that's kind of where we leave him.
Yeah, when he gives everything to the Valkyrie because he acknowledges that she embodies more of that ruler, that monarchy that is in Asgard, and he allows himself to continue being an adventurer, and we see him kind of join the Guardians.
Yeah. It makes me think of what he does, which is something that I think we all struggle with, which is maturing, right? We talk a lot about like being mature.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you should be mature. And sometimes I think we look at maturity as like a certain part of like characteristics, like, okay, I need to check these boxes.
Yeah.
But really maturity is, if I look at myself today compared to who I was yesterday, compared to who I was the day before, have I grown? Have I changed? And that is maturing, right? If you stay the same, you're not maturing.
Yeah.
But it is this internal, like you can only mature if you reflect back on your own stuff, not what other people think. And I think that's where he starts to shift quite a bit. Like he now is just looking at himself.
Yeah. And
obviously, we fast forward, like they come back, they get the stones, they have the snap, everybody comes back, then it's the huge battle. And there's, I think, a few character defining moments in the battle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you had hinted one out earlier. Do you want to...
Do you want to start? Okay, I don't know if you had anything. I'll talk about mine. No. Because he's matured and he's in this battle, right? Like he becomes like fat battle Thor, like everything happening him. When Cap picks up the hammer, right, and saves his life, he's ecstatic. He's so happy.
Yes.
That compared to Ultron, right? The fear versus happiness, because he doesn't need anything else to prove who he is anymore, right? Like as soon as Freya talked to him and he got the hammer, he was like, okay, cool, I'm still worthy, which was just about him, not about being more worthy than anyone else, but that he's okay. So when Cap does it, there's no threat to him anymore because he knows he's worthy, and that's all that matters. That other people can be worthy too, but that doesn't take away his worthiness.
I don't know why it just resonated with me. In his conversation with Freya, he believes he has to be special. And Freya tells him, no, you don't have to be special. You don't have to be anything. You don't have to be anything. And I think that's what gives him that access, is that before he was special because he had Mjolnir. And so he didn't need to be special because he could be accepted and embraced as Thor, not Thor, Prince of Asgard, son of, Odin's son, right? Oh, I don't know why that just...
Well, and that what he recognizes is he is special, but so can everyone else. Like,
it's not just because of Mjolnir.
It's not a comparison thing, right? That he becomes... I think he's so... Because his response when Cap, like, picks it up and, like, saves it wasn't...
He cheered.
He cheers, but he said, and I didn't watch this, right? Like, so this is just from memory, so it could be a little bit off. But he says something like, I knew it, right? Yeah. Like this thing of like, yes, like it's okay. It's okay. I'm special. I'm unique, but so are you. And that's okay, right? And when we can start to like not compare ourselves to everyone else and have this be a winner take all, we can be more collaborative, right? Like they actually then when the battle is going on, right? You take the small one, I take the big one. Like there's maybe not as much of a threat. Maybe a little bit of the hero complex stuff is coming out a little bit, but they work together, right? When we can be comfortable, right? And I think this is a lesson that we can learn from Thor, right? When we can be comfortable with who we are and accept all of our stuffs, even our flaws, even the parts that like, yeah, you screwed up and half the universe is dead because of you. When we can just accept those things, we can then accept other people for who they are, and we can work together and work through stuff a lot better. Yeah. Because when he was trying to do this all alone, it wasn't working. But as soon as he's like, okay, this is who I am, here's everybody else, we can get through this.
Yeah, he is unique because he is Thor, and that's all. That's the only thing that he needs to be unique.
Yeah. Anything else from like the battle for you? Nope. Okay. So thinking kind of as we wrap up here this little bit, looking at from the last episode when we started talking about the first Thor movie where he was introduced all the way to now, what are like any major thoughts or anything come up for you? Like,
not anything that we haven't already said. I think that I think the last thing that I had written was finally individuating. That's literally like my last note, which was I think that he has finally gone through the process of understanding where he felt concretized and allowing himself to begin exploring who am I.
That he's in this new space of who am I, which is like super exciting for Thor: Love and Thunder, which will be the next movie that he's going to be in
as the Asgardians of the galaxy.
Well, we'll see if they're. Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. It's not out yet. We'll see. But it'll be really interesting to see the journey that he continues to go on, because that movie. Well, we don't know what a plot or anything else is. It's based off of Valkyrie's the king in charge, and Natalie Portman's back and is going to hold the hammer, right? So like, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to him and what complexes come back or don't come back, or the growth that he goes. So I found that really interesting to kind of do this more character study, to kind of see the ebbs and flows, because it's not like I think one of the reasons the MCU is probably so popular is because people struggle. Okay, I'm like, words are hard sometimes. You know, this happens at the end of like recording 2 of these back to back. The struggle is he changes in one movie, but then in the next movie he's not completely back to the beginning, but some of the old stuff that he had worked through is back a little bit, and then he grows a little bit more, then he takes a few steps back, and then he takes more steps forward, and like there's this push and pull in like the character development, because that's what we do in life, versus like maybe a Lord of the Rings or movies that are like more of a traditional like series of movies. There's not that push and pull. Like, it's just one big character arc, and you can see little stuff in the movies, but they don't usually go backwards.
It's still just one journey.
Yeah.
Whereas the MCU is multiple journeys building into another. Like, there's many journeys in the big journey.
Yeah, and I think that is more representative of like our own life, right? We have daily journeys, monthly journeys. We have different struggles we're going through in time frames. You know, we start college. We end college, like that's a journey, but there's lots of challenges and struggles in that. And we have relationships, we end relationships, we have marriages, we have kids. All these things impact us, and it's just this constant like push and pull. And that's where I think resonate a lot with the MCU. And Thor too, I think, started off as the most non-human character, right? But by the end, he's one of the most human. Like, he's more flawed by the end of Endgame than he was maybe at the beginning of Thor. And and I say the word flawed, like more human, more balanced, right? All the different aspects of him are out versus just the one.
We see beyond the complex. He allows us to see more of him.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So that is all that we have. We'll wrap that up today. So thank you guys for listening. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that fun jazz. We didn't do a question of the day for this, but just what's your favorite Thor moment? We'll just put that in, because I write this down on the show notes. So if you guys ever read the show notes, there's always the question of the day listed. Plus we like the interaction, and that's an easy way to do an interaction. So what is your favorite Thor moment in any part of the MCU? Keep it to the movies, because the comic books bring a whole lot more up. So with that, make sure you like, subscribe, and we will see you guys next week.